My stepson planned a luxury journey and took my wife with him, while I was completely overlooked. No discussion, no invitation. I didn't argue or ask questions. I packed my suitcases and left without saying a word. What they discovered weeks later changed how they saw me forever. Before I tell you how everything unfolded and why leaving silently mattered more than any argument ever could, take a second to support this channel. Subscribe and drop a comment about where you're watching from. It helps stories like mine reach people who might need to hear them. I'm 81 years old. My name is Henry Whitmore, and I've learned that being ignored doesn't always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like smiles, good intentions, and people deciding things for you because they're convinced you'll always be there. I married Rose when we were both well into adulthood. We weren't young, reckless, or dramatic. We were careful, thoughtful. We believed companionship mattered more than fireworks. Her son, Julian, was already established when I entered his life. Confident, ambitious, and used to being the center of attention. I never tried to compete with that. I didn't need to. I thought respect would grow naturally with time. For years, I played my part quietly. I handled repairs, finances, appointments, anything Rose asked for help with. I attended family dinners, birthdays, holidays. I listened to Julian's stories about work and travel and success. I congratulated him when others did. I never asked for anything in return. Looking back, that was my mistake. Last spring, Julian announced a major professional milestone. Not a promotion exactly, but the kind of recognition that came with invitations, influence, and access. To celebrate, he planned a luxury journey. 10 days across Europe aboard a private cruise liner. Everything was first class. Private balconies. Curated excursions. The kind of trip people brag about for years. He told us over dinner, scrolling through photos on his phone like a salesman closing a deal. Rose leaned closer, fascinated. I waited for him to look up and say my name. Instead, he turned to her and said, "You should come with me. You've earned it." Rose glanced at me, hesitating just long enough to notice. Then she smiled and said, "Henry won't mind. He doesn't really enjoy long trips." She didn't ask. Julian didn't correct her. And just like that, a decision about my life was made, without me being part of it. I told myself it was fine. At my age, you get used to being practical. Someone needed to stay back. Someone needed to take care of things. I convinced myself that was me. In the weeks leading up to their departure, the house transformed into a staging area that didn't include me. New luggage appeared. Clothes were laid out and discussed. Plans were finalized in conversations that lowered when I entered the room. I became a background fixture in my own home. The morning they left, I carried bags to the car. Rose kissed my cheek and promised to bring me something special. Julian thanked me for being understanding. The car pulled away, and I stood in the driveway watching it disappear. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was revealing. During their journey, photos flooded the family group chat. Sunsets, dinners, smiling faces wrapped in luxury. Comments poured in, congratulations, hearts, applause. No one asked where I was. No one mentioned my name. I watched from a distance, realizing this wasn't about one trip. It was about how easily I could be excluded without anyone noticing. They returned glowing and energized. Rose talked about the ocean air and how relaxed she felt. Julian spoke about networking opportunities and chance meetings that might lead to even bigger things. I listened, nodded, and returned to my routines. What finally settled things for me happened 2 weeks later. We had a small gathering at the lake house in Vermont. Nothing formal. Just family, food, and familiar conversations. I almost skipped it, but part of me wanted to see if anyone would acknowledge what had happened. If someone would say, "We missed you," or even, "It felt strange without you there." No one did. Julian was the focus of the evening. Stories from the journey were retold like legends. Rose sat beside him, smiling proudly. When someone asked for a group photo, Rose handed me her phone. "Can you take this?" she asked. I framed the shot carefully. Julian in the center, arms around shoulders. Everyone included, except me. I handed the phone back and stepped aside, unnoticed. Later that night, as I walked down the hallway. I overheard plans being made for another trip. Shorter this time, but still extravagant. Julian offered to book it. No one asked if I'd be going. No one assumed I would. That was the moment clarity arrived. I wasn't being excluded by accident. I'd been assigned a role, dependable, quiet, optional. The man who would always make things easier and never ask to be included. So I stopped making things easy. I didn't confront them. I didn't argue. At 81, you learn that explanations are wasted on people who've already decided who you are. Instead, I prepared. Over the next week, I packed slowly and deliberately, one suitcase at a time. Important documents first. Clothes I actually wore. Books that mattered. I secured a small apartment near the water in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, clean, quiet, and mine. I arranged everything without telling a soul. On a cool morning, while the house was still asleep, I left a short note on the kitchen table. Nothing emotional, just that I needed time and space to take care of myself. Then I walked out. I expected concern, confusion, maybe even panic. None of that came. They didn't notice I was gone. Not that day. Not the next. It took weeks before the silence broke. And when it finally did, the call didn't come from my stepson. It came from his wife. And she wasn't calling to ask if I was okay. The call came on a Thursday afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after I'd left. I remember the exact moment because I was standing by the window of my new apartment, watching boats drift lazily across the harbor, thinking how strange it was that peace could feel so unfamiliar. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity has a way of slipping past caution, especially when you know, deep down, who's on the other end. "This is Elena," the woman said without preamble. Julian's wife. Her voice was tight, controlled, already edged with irritation. "We need to talk." I didn't respond right away. Silence makes people uncomfortable when they expect authority. "You can't just disappear like this," she continued. "Do you have any idea what you put Rose through?" That was the first time my wife's name had been mentioned since I left. Not once before. Not in concern. Not in confusion. Only now as leverage. "I didn't disappear," I said calmly. "I relocated." There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. "You left without saying anything." Julian's been trying to figure out what's going on. That was a lie. My phone log was empty. "I left a note," I replied. "If he didn't read it, that's not my responsibility." Elena paused, clearly recalibrating. Then she tried a different tone, cooler, more professional. "Look, Henry, we're family. You can't just walk away when things don't go your way." Family. Interesting how that word only surfaced when someone felt inconvenienced. "I didn't walk away from family," I said. "I stepped away from being overlooked." She scoffed softly. "This is about the trip, isn't it? You're upset you weren't included." I smiled to myself. They always reduce it to something small, something petty. That way, they don't have to face the pattern. "This isn't about one trip," I said. "It's about years of decisions being made as if I didn't exist." She went quiet. Then sharper, "Rose is devastated." That stung, but not enough to bend me. "Is she?" I asked, because no one noticed I was gone for weeks. Elena didn't answer that. Instead, she said, "Julian thinks you're trying to make a point. He wants to talk." "I'm not making a point," I said. "I made a decision." I ended the call before she could respond. That evening, Rose finally called. Her voice was softer than Elena's, but heavier, tired. "Henry," she said, like she'd been practicing the word. "Where are you?" "I'm safe," I replied. "I'm okay." "Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" she asked, hurt slipping through the question. "I did," I said gently. "I left a note." There was a pause. Then, quietly, "I thought you were just upset. I didn't think you'd actually go." That sentence landed harder than anything Elena had said. "You didn't think I'd actually go." I closed my eyes. "Rose, when Julian invited you on that journey, did you ever stop to ask if I want to come?" She hesitated. "You didn't seem interested." "Did you ask?" Silence. "I didn't think it would matter," she finally admitted. There it was. The truth, unpolished. That's the problem, I said. It always mattered. You just decided it didn't. She started crying then, real tears this time. Apologies followed, soft, overlapping, messy. She said she never meant to hurt me, that she thought I was content, that she assumed I understood. I listened. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I said, I understand now. That's why I left. She asked me to come home. I told her I needed time. After that, the calls increased. Julian left voicemails, measured at first, then defensive, then frustrated. He spoke about family obligations, about how his mother was upset, about how the situation was unnecessary. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he ask how I felt. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while they were scrambling emotionally, I was being methodical. You see, when you reach 81, you don't act on impulse. You plan. And over the years, I'd learned a great deal about how Julian operated, his habits, his assumptions, his comfort with cutting corners, because someone else would smooth them over. I hadn't been blind. I'd just been quiet. During those weeks alone after the cruise, before I left, I'd noticed things that hadn't added up. Charges, itineraries, conversations that stopped abruptly. Julian had used my address more than once for official documents, just to simplify things. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now I thought of everything. So while they were arguing about feelings, I was reviewing paperwork. I contacted my attorney, the same man who'd helped me restructure my estate after my first heart scare years ago. I explained the situation plainly. No drama. No accusations. I want to make sure everything is in order, I told him, and I want to understand my exposure. He asked the right questions. Calm ones. Thorough ones. By the end of that meeting, it was clear that my leaving hadn't just unsettled emotions. It had unsettled assumptions. Julian had built parts of his life on the idea that I was always there, that my name, my home, my silence could be relied upon, without asking, without confirmation. That kind of comfort breeds carelessness. A week later, Elena called again. Her tone had changed. Henry, she said, forcing politeness, there are complications. Go on. Julian's dealing with some issues related to the trip, paperwork, payments, things that need to be clarified. I leaned back in my chair. And you're calling me because? Another pause. Longer this time. Well, she said carefully, some things were routed through you. It was easier at the time. Easier. So now that I'm not there, I said, it's harder. She exhaled sharply. You don't have to be difficult. I laughed once, softly. I'm not being difficult. I'm being absent. You're the ones who taught me how that works. That was the moment I knew this was no longer just about feelings. It was about consequences. I told her all communication would go through my attorney from now on. Then I hung up. That night, Julian tried calling again. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened a folder on my desk, one I'd started weeks earlier. Inside were copies of documents, dates, notes I'd made when something fell off, patterns I'd ignored because I loved my wife and wanted peace. Peace has a price when it's built on silence. I didn't want revenge. Not loud, destructive revenge. I wanted clarity. And I wanted accountability. What I didn't know yet was that Julian, realizing his usual pressure wasn't working, was about to make his biggest mistake. And once he did, there would be no going back. Julian's mistake came faster than I expected. 3 days after Elena's last call, my attorney rang me early in the morning. His voice was calm, but there was an edge underneath it. The kind that tells you something important has shifted. Henry, he said, Julian attempted to access a document repository tied to your old residential address. I sat down slowly. Access how? He submitted a verification request. My attorney replied, digitally. He assumed it would auto-approve the way it used to. Used to. That word carried weight. For years, Julian had treated my name, my address, and my quiet cooperation as tools. He never asked permission. He assumed it. And because I didn't push back, the system never corrected him. Until now, the request didn't go through. The address was no longer active for him. The authentication failed. And when it failed, it didn't just disappear. It logged time, IP address, purpose. That single action told me everything I needed to know. Julian hadn't reached out because he missed me. He hadn't panicked because Rose was heartbroken. He was scared because the structure he'd built, one that relied on my presence without my participation, was cracking. And instead of stopping, he tried to force it open. That afternoon, my attorney and I went through everything again, line by line. Not with emotion, with precision. We mapped out what Julian had access to in the past, what no longer did, and where assumptions had replaced consent. The picture wasn't flattering. Nothing illegal had happened, yet, but there was enough gray area to make a very uncomfortable case if questions were asked. Questions Julian did not want asked, especially not now, when his professional reputation had never mattered more. My attorney leaned back in his chair and looked at me carefully. What do you want to do next? I thought about Rose, about her voice on the phone, about the way she'd said she didn't think I'd actually leave. I don't want to punish anyone. I said, I want separation. Clean, documented, undeniable. He nodded. Then we formalize it. The letter went out the next morning. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't emotional. It didn't accuse. It simply stated that I had removed myself from any shared administrative, residential, or financial involvement, and that any further attempts to use my identity, address, or authorization would be treated as unauthorized. Polite, professional, final. Julian called within hours. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His tone had shifted. No longer confident. No longer irritated. Tight. Controlled. Henry, he said, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. The word people use when the truth is inconvenient. I didn't respond. That night, Rose came to my apartment unannounced. I heard the knock and knew immediately who it was. Some instincts don't fade with age. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes tired. She'd driven hours without calling first. I didn't know where else to go, she said. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat across from each other in the quiet of my living room. No decorations yet. No history on the walls. Just space. I didn't think it would get this far, she said softly. Neither did I replied. But it did. She twisted her hands together. Julian's in trouble. Not serious trouble, but complications. He says you're making it worse. I looked at her steadily. I'm not making anything worse. I stopped fixing things for him. That hit her. I could see it register. You always smooth things over, she said. I guess we got used to that. Yes, I said quietly. You did. She cried then. Not loudly. Just the kind of crying that comes from realizing something too late. I never meant to make you feel invisible, she said. I know, I replied, and I meant it, but intent doesn't erase impact. She asked me to come back. Not permanently, just to talk, to help calm things down. I shook my head. If I come back now, nothing changes. This only works if I stay gone. She didn't argue. She stayed a while longer, then left with a promise to call. I didn't stop her. I didn't follow her. The next move came from Julian's attorney. A formal request for mediation. Neutral setting. Shared goal of resolution. The language was careful, but the subtext was clear. Julian wanted control back, and he was willing to negotiate for it. My attorney advised me to attend, but on my terms. We met at a small conference office halfway between our cities. Julian arrived late. That alone told me he was still trying to assert dominance. He looked tired, not defeated, just worn down by resistance. Henry, he said, offering a handshake. I ignored it and took my seat. The mediator began with pleasantries, then opened the floor. Julian spoke first. He talked about family, about miscommunication, about how he'd always respected me. He said my departure had blindsided everyone, that it had disrupted plans. Plans. I waited until he finished. You never asked me to go on that trip. I said evenly. You never noticed when I stopped calling. You didn't even realize I'd left until weeks later. That's not fair, he said quickly. We thought you needed space. You didn't think about me at all, I replied. And that was comfortable for you. The mediator tried to soften the exchange, but Julian pressed on. You could have just said something, he snapped. Instead, you disappeared and started making things difficult. I looked at him then, really looked, at the man who had grown used to my silence as a resource. I didn't disappear, I said. I removed access. That shut him up. The mediator cleared his throat. Perhaps we should focus on what each party needs moving forward. I need distance, I said, and for my name, address, and authority to stop being used as if they're communal property. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it again. In the end, the agreement was simple, written, enforceable. He would cease all use of my information. All communication would go through legal channels unless initiated by me. No assumptions. No shortcuts. Julian signed it with a tight jaw. As we stood to leave, he spoke quietly. You didn't have to do this. I met his eyes. I did, because no one else was going to. After that, the noise died down. No more calls. No more messages. No more surprise visits. Life settled into a steady rhythm. Mornings by the water. Afternoons reading or walking. Evenings quiet and unclaimed. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Because just when I believed the distance was holding, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. One tied to an institution Julian worked closely with. The subject line was simple. Request for clarification. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. And in that moment, I understood that Julian's attempt to force access had triggered something far bigger than either of us had anticipated. Something that wouldn't be handled quietly. Something that, once set in motion, couldn't be undone. And that was when I realized the silence I'd chosen was about to speak for itself. The email sat unopened on my screen for nearly an hour. Request for clarification. No emotion. No accusation. Just a neutral subject line from an institutional address Julian worked closely with. One of those places that doesn't send messages unless something has already raised a flag. When I finally opened it, the tone was exactly what I expected. Professional. Courteous. Carefully worded. They were conducting a routine internal review. My name had appeared in connection with several administrative references tied to Julian's recent travel and filings. They want to confirm whether I had authorized continued use of my address and personal details. I didn't panic. I didn't rush. I forwarded the email to my attorney and closed my laptop. By the afternoon, he called me back. This is what I was concerned about, he said. Once an institution starts asking questions, they don't stop at the first answer. What do you recommend? I asked. We respond. Briefly. Factually. And we attach documentation. That was the key. Documentation. Not opinions. Not feelings. Just timelines and signatures. What was authorized, what wasn't, and when that authorization ended. We replied the next morning. I confirmed that I had not granted permission for my information to be used after a specific date. I attached the formal notice sent to Julian weeks earlier. Nothing more. Nothing less. 2 hours later, I received an automated acknowledgement. And then nothing for 3 days. During that time, Rose didn't call. Julian didn't try to reach me. The silence returned, heavier than before. The kind that isn't empty, but loaded. On the 4th day, my attorney called again. They've escalated, he said. They're widening the review. I closed my eyes. Does this affect me? I asked. No, he replied immediately. You're clean. This is about patterns. Patterns. That's what silence gives you time to see. By the end of the week, words started filtering back through channels I didn't even realize were still connected to me. A former colleague of Julian's asked how I was doing. A family acquaintance mentioned Julian seemed stressed. Someone else said there were rumors he might be stepping back from a few responsibilities temporarily. No one asked me questions directly, but everyone suddenly knew my name existed. Rose finally called on a Sunday evening. Her voice was calm, but strained. They're asking Julian for explanations, she said, about paperwork, about assumptions, about why certain things were done without confirmation. I'm not involved, I said gently. I know, she replied. That's what scares him. I didn't feel satisfaction. What I felt was distance, clear, defined, immovable. I never wanted this to blow up, she continued. I know, I said again, but this isn't about intention anymore. She asked if I could help calm things down. I told her the truth. I already did, by stepping away. That was the last conversation we had for a while. A month passed, then another. The review concluded quietly, the way these things always do. No announcements, no public statements, just subtle shifts. Julian stepped out of a role. Responsibilities redistributed. His trajectory flattened. No one blamed me. No one thanked me. And that was exactly how it should be. One afternoon, while walking along the harbor, I received a message from Julian himself. Not a call, not a demand. A message. I should have asked. I should have noticed. I didn't. I'm sorry. I read it twice. Then I put the phone back in my pocket. An apology doesn't rewind years. It doesn't rebuild habits. It doesn't automatically earn access. I didn't respond right away. Days later, I sent one sentence. I hope you learn from this. Nothing more. That was enough. Over time, rose and I found a new rhythm. Separate spaces. Honest conversations. No assumptions. We didn't rush back into anything. We let trust rebuild slowly, or not at all, depending on the day. And Julian? He adjusted. Or maybe he was forced to. Either way, he learned something he'd never had before. That silence doesn't mean consent, and absence doesn't mean weakness. As for me, life settled into something steady and real. I spent mornings by the water, evenings with books I put off for decades. I made friends who asked questions and waited for answers. I lived without performing usefulness for anyone else's comfort. At 81, I finally understood this. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to fight to be respected. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is leave quietly and let the truth follow you. When I packed those suitcases, I didn't know how far the ripple would travel. I just knew I was done shrinking. And weeks later, when they finally understood what my absence meant, it wasn't anger they felt. It was realization. And before I go, if this story resonated with you, support the channel by subscribing and leaving a comment about where you're watching from. It helps stories like mine reach others who might still be waiting to be seen. Thank you for listening.